A storm raged over the sprawling estate that overlooked the city lights, as though the heavens themselves wrestled with the weight of one man's impossible fate. Damien Whitford, a billionaire who had built empires from nothing but ambition and iron will, sat at the head of a long mahogany table, staring at the crisp parchment of his late father's will. The words carved into it were like daggers piercing through his calm exterior. Asterisk. If my son does not produce an heir within the next 30 days, all holdings companies and assets shall be dissolved and transferred to the Whitford Trust for the Community. Asterisk. 30 days. A cruel ultimatum. The very legacy he had sacrificed friendships, love, and youth would vanish unless he fulfilled this one condition. Damien, who had never been in love, who had kept women at a safe distance with money and contracts, was suddenly shackled by a deadline no negotiation could undo. His closest advisors tried to hide their unease as they pitched ideas, arranged marriages, fertility clinics, discreet surrogates, but nothing could move through the tangled maze of legality and timing. That night, when silence had fallen heavy across the mansion, it was his private nurse, Elise, who lingered by the firelight in the corner of his study. She had served him loyally through his battles with insomnia, his hidden health scares, and his solitary nights. A woman of quiet strength and secret burdens, she had always been invisible to his world of power. Her voice broke through the silence, low yet unwavering. "Mr. Whitford, there is another way." He looked up, startled to find her eyes fixed on him with a determination he had never noticed before. Elise stepped forward, every word carefully measured. "I know what the will demands. I know how much time you have left. If you want an heir, I could help, for a price." The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. She wasn't trembling, wasn't begging. It was a business proposition. Damien's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "You would sell yourself to me? Just like that?" Her lips curved into something between defiance and desperation. "I am not selling myself, Mr. Whitford. I am selling a solution. You need an heir. I need money, more than you could imagine, for my brother's treatment, for debts that bury me alive every day. I'm offering you the simplest path. Clean, discreet, binding." For the first time in years, Damien was unsettled, not because of her proposal, but because beneath her cool mask, he caught a flicker of pain, of secrets deeper than his own. His entire life had been defined by cold contracts and calculated risks. Yet here stood a woman offering herself as both savior and commodity. He leaned back, studying her like a chess piece he wasn't sure how to move. "And what if I say no?" Elise didn't flinch. "Then you'll lose everything. And I will lose everything, too. But if you say yes, you might gain more than you expect." The fire crackled between them, the weight of unspoken truths pressing harder than the storm outside. Damien had seen countless people crawl for his money, but none had dared cloak desperation in such unyielding dignity. Something inside him twisted, a dangerous curiosity blooming in hollow places he thought long dead. He stood, the air between them taut with unspoken tension. "Very well," he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "But if we do this, Nurse Elise, understand there are no half measures. You will live in this house. You will answer to me, and you will follow every condition I set." Her chin lifted, her eyes locking with his unafraid. "Then write the contract, because I am ready." What Damien did not yet know was that Elise carried more than desperation in her heart. She carried a secret, one that could upend not just his inheritance, but the very foundation of his life. The contract was signed before the sun rose, the ink still drying as Damien placed the papers into his safe. Elise sat opposite him at the long oak table, her hands folded neatly on her lap, though her pulse hammered loud enough she feared he might hear it. The arrangement was simple on paper. Cold, clinical, a transaction, but nothing about the way of his stare felt simple. His eyes lingered on her, as though he were trying to peel back layers she had fought for years to keep hidden. The mansion shifted around her in the following days, its vast halls no longer a workplace, but a prison and sanctuary all at once. Staff who had once treated her as invisible now looked at her with thinly veiled suspicion. Whispers followed her through corridors. Servants who had polished silverware in silence now exchanged knowing glances as she passed. Damien, however, gave no explanation, no justification for her sudden elevation from nurse to something more. He merely commanded, and the house obeyed. At night, he summoned her to the wing where his private chambers stood. He did not touch her immediately, as she had expected. Instead, he studied her with the cool detachment of a man weighing an investment. His voice was calm, deliberate, edged with steel. You are here for one purpose: to secure an heir. Do not mistake this for affection. Her breath caught, though she had not expected tenderness. I understand. But she didn't, not truly, for though his words were ruthless, his gaze betrayed him. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, his eyes softened, lingering not on her body but her face, as though searching for answers in the quiet strength she carried. The first night he kissed her, it was not the way she had imagined, not with hunger or cruelty, but with restraint, as though he were fighting something inside himself. His lips brushed hers in the faintest test, then deepened when she did not pull away. She could have reminded herself this was part of the deal, but instead, her heart betrayed her with a tremor that ran deep, awakening something she had buried long ago. Days bled into nights, and the mansion became an arena of shadows and unspoken truths. Elise found herself learning the man behind the empire. Damien worked late into the night, poring over contracts and figures, yet beneath his armor of wealth and dominance lay loneliness so vast it frightened her. He ate in silence, walked in silence, lived in silence, until she arrived. And though she was careful not to reveal her own truths, little pieces slipped through. The way her hands trembled when she held her phone late at night, checking messages from a hospital across the city. The way her gaze hardened when the word money passed his lips, as if it were both a lifeline and a poison. One evening, as rain streaked down the windows, Damien found her sitting by the fire in his study, a book unopened on her lap. He had just ended a call with his lawyers. Frustration etched across his features. They say, time is against me, he muttered, almost to himself. But I have never lost a time. She looked up, her eyes steady on him. Not every battle can be fought with power, Mr. Whitford. Some things require surrender. The word unsettled him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid, his thoughts circling her like a predator unsure of its prey. You speak as if you know. Her throat tightened. She thought of her brother lying in that hospital bed, machines breathing life into him, doctors reminding her daily that time was not a friend. She thought of the debts crushing her, the sacrifices that had led her here. She almost told him, almost let the truth spill, but stop herself. He would see it as weakness, as manipulation. Better to keep her silence. Yet something about her haunted him. Damien had spent his life surrounded by liars, sycophants, and opportunists. But Elise, she didn't beg. She didn't plead. She simply endured. And endurance, he realized, was a rare and dangerous kind of strength. The nights grew heavier with tension. Every touch between them was a battlefield. Every kiss a war of wills. He wanted control. She offered defiance. He wanted detachment. She gave him humanity. Somewhere in the quiet corners of the mansion, the boundaries of their contract blurred. He caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking, memorizing the curve of her smile when she thought no one saw, the fierce way she held her head high despite the whispers that followed her. And then came the night that changed everything. A dinner was held at the estate, a gathering of investors and family friends who had sniffed rumors of Damien's predicament. Elise, dressed in a gown he had ordered for her, entered the dining hall at his side. The room fell into silence, eyes widening, lips curling into smirks. Among them sat his aunt, Veronica Whitford, the executor of the will and the sharpest vulture in the family. "My dear nephew," she purred, raising her glass. "So this is your chosen solution?" Bold, very bold. Her eyes swept Elise from head to toe, dissecting her with cruel precision. "Tell me, child, do you know what kind of world you are stepping into? Or are you simply dazzled by the glitter?" The humiliation burned Elise's cheeks, but she did not lower her gaze. Instead, she met Veronica's eyes and spoke clearly, her voice calm. "I know exactly what world I'm stepping into. And unlike most here, I didn't come for glitter. I came for survival. That makes me more dangerous than you think." The room stilled. A faint smile tugged at Damien's lips, pride blooming where he'd expected shame. Elise had not cowered. She had fought, and with words sharper than steel. For the first time, he felt a flicker of admiration, foreign and unsettling. That night, when the guests had gone, he found her standing alone on the balcony, the city sprawling below like a bed of stars. He approached silently, the weight of the evening pressing between them. "You surprise me," he said quietly. She did not turn. "And did you think I would stay silent? Let them tear me apart while you watched?" His jaw tightened, but not from anger. "No, I wanted to see if you would fight. And you did." Finally, she looked at him, her eyes reflecting the distant lights. "Because I've been fighting my whole life. You think you know desperation, Mr. Whitford, but you don't. You've always had wealth as a weapon. I've had nothing but my will. That's why I'm here. Not because I want your money, but because I refuse to lose the one person I have left in this world." Her voice broke on the last words, and before she could stop herself, the secret slipped free. Damien froze, his heart pounding. The one person? Who? Her chest rose and fell, the storm of her truth breaking at last. "My brother. He's dying. And the money you promised me, it's not greed. It's the only chance to save him." The silence that followed was deafening. Damien's entire world of contracts and cold logic seemed to shatter under the weight of her confession. He had thought her desperate for riches, for comfort, for escape. But she had been fighting for something far more powerful than any fortune. For the first time, Damien saw Elise not as a solution, not as a pawn, but as a woman carrying battles that mirrored his own in ways he had never imagined. And it unsettled him more than anything else ever had. Her confession lingered in the air between them like smoke, thick and inescapable, seeping into every corner of Damien's mind. He stared at her, caught between disbelief and a strange, piercing ache that unsettled him more than any corporate betrayal or financial risk ever had. Elise stood before him not as a woman who had bargained her body for his inheritance, but as someone raw, desperate, and unflinchingly human. He moved closer, his footsteps deliberate, until the distance between them narrowed to a breath. "You should have told me this from the start," he said, his voice low, threaded with something dangerously close to guilt. Her chin lifted in defiance, though her hands twisted together, betraying her turmoil. "And if I had, you would have thought I was manipulating you. You would have thrown me out and chosen another. That's the kind of man you are, Mr. Whitford, calculating, merciless. I couldn't risk it." Her words struck deeper than she intended. Damien had always prided himself on his cold detachment, on being untouchable. Yet here she was, stripping him bare with truths he had spent years hiding behind power to avoid. He reached out before he could stop himself, fingers grazing her arm. Her skin was warm, alive, trembling under his touch. "Elise," he murmured, and for once her name carried no command, only a weight he couldn't put into words. She jerked away, her eyes flashing with fire. "Don't pity me. Don't you dare. I made this deal. I will see it through. But don't stand there acting like you care. You don't." She turned, storming back into the mansion, leaving Damien rooted to the balcony, his fists clenched at his sides. He told himself she was wrong. He told himself he didn't care. But the hollow gnawing in his chest whispered otherwise. The following days stretched taut with silence. Elise moved through the mansion like a ghost, polite but distant, performing her role with clinical precision. Damien watched her from the shadows, frustration twisting inside him. He had wanted a transaction, not entanglement, yet she had somehow tangled herself into his every thought. He found himself asking questions about her brother, about the weight she carried, though she answered little, retreating behind walls of her own. One night, unable to bear the distance, he summoned her to his study. She arrived stiff and guarded, her eyes fixed anywhere but his. "You've kept your distance," he said, his tone cool though his insides burned. Her mouth curved into a bitter smile. "Isn't that what you wanted? This is business, remember?" He slammed his glass down on the desk, the sound echoing through the room. "Damn it, Elise. You think I don't see what you're doing? You think I don't know what it costs you to stand here every night pretending you feel nothing? Do you take me for a fool?" She flinched at his outburst, but did not cower. Instead, her voice rose, fierce and trembling. "And what about you? You hide behind contracts and control because you're terrified of what happens if you let someone in. You treat everything like a negotiation, even people, especially people. But you can't buy loyalty or love or trust. You can only earn it. And you," her voice cracked, and she turned away, shoulders shaking, "you don't even know how." The room fell into silence, broken only by the sound of her uneven breaths. Damien stared at her, the truth in her words slicing deeper than he wanted to admit. For years he had walled himself off, convinced that vulnerability was weakness. But now, faced with a woman who had nothing to gain by telling him these truths, he felt those walls tremble. Slowly, he rose from his chair and crossed the room. His hand hovered over her shoulder, then settled gently. She stiffened but did not pull away. "You're right," he said softly, the admission foreign on his tongue. "I don't know how. I was never taught. Everything I built came from power, not trust. But you," he paused, struggling to find words that wouldn't sound like weakness. "You make me want to try." Elise turned then, her eyes red-rimmed, searching his face for the lies she expected. But for once, there was none. Only sincerity, raw and unguarded. And it was that sincerity that frightened her most. The days that followed carried a strange, unspoken shift. Damien grew softer at the edges, though he would never admit it. He began to ask after her brother's treatment, secretly arranging for the best specialist to review his case, though he never told Elise. She, in turn, found herself drawn into moments of unexpected intimacy, meals shared in silence that felt less like business, brief touches that lingered longer than necessary, glances that carried more weight than words. But shadows loomed. Veronica, ever watchful, had caught the change in her nephew. She visited the mansion more frequently now, her sharp eyes narrowing whenever Elise entered the room. One afternoon, as Elise walked through the gardens alone, Veronica intercepted her. "My dear," she began with false sweetness, "I must commend your audacity. Few would dare weave themselves into Damien's life so thoroughly. But don't mistake his attention for permanence. When your purpose is served, you'll be discarded like the rest." Elise bristled, but she refused to let the older woman see her wounded. "If that is the case, so be it. I came here with open eyes, knowing what I risked. But tell me, Ms. Whitford, what are you risking? Because it seems to me the thought of Damien actually finding someone who can stand by him terrifies you." For once, Veronica faltered, her smile thinning. "You speak boldly, but mark my words. This house has no room for sentiment, and neither does Damien. Don't let his softened edges fool you. Men like him don't change." She swept away, leaving Elise shaken but resolute. That night, Damien found Elise on the balcony again, her shoulders tense. Without a word, he joined her, the city glittering below. After a long silence, he asked, "What did she say to you?" Elise hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing I didn't already know." He studied her, reading the truth she would not speak, and felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it startled him. For the first time, Damien realized this was no longer about an heir or inheritance. Elise had become something more, something dangerous, because she had slipped past a fortress he had built around his heart. He reached for her hand then, not as a demand, not as part of contract, but as a man seeking connection. She stiffened at first, then allowed their fingers to intertwine. The silence stretched, heavy with possibilities neither dared voice. Yet both knew that the lines between business and something far deeper had already blurred beyond recognition. And as the 30-day deadline drew nearer, the question no longer lingered on whether an heir would be conceived, but whether the fragile bond forming between them could survive the storm waiting on the horizon. The deadline loomed closer with each passing day, an invisible clock ticking inside the walls of the mansion, haunting both Damien and Elise. He had always lived with deadlines. Corporate acquisitions, billion-dollar deals, ruthless negotiations. But this one was different. This one was bound not to contracts, but to flesh and blood, to something intimate and uncontrollable. And worse, for the first time in his life, Damien wasn't sure he wanted to win only because of the prize at stake. He wanted her, not just the heir. He wanted Elise in ways that terrified him. Elise, too, felt the shift but tried to ignore it. She reminded herself every morning why she was there. Her brother, lying in a hospital bed, waiting for money that could save his life. She reminded herself every night that her heart had no business in this arrangement. But the reminders were losing their power. The way Damien's hand lingered on hers, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the rare moments when his armor cracked and he revealed glimpses of the lonely man beneath. Each moment chipped away at her resolve. It came to a breaking point one evening when Damien entered her room unannounced. He carried no contracts, no air of command, just himself, raw and restless. Elise was by the window, brushing her hair, and when she turned, their eyes locked. "I can't do this anymore," he said abruptly. Her chest tightened. "Do what?" "Pretend this is only about the will. Pretend that I don't think about you every damn second of the day. Pretend that when you walk into a room, I don't lose the iron control I built my life on." His words struck like lightning, illuminating everything she had been trying to bury. She set the brush down, her hands trembling. "Damien, don't." But he was already closing the distance between them, his voice low and rough. "Tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me this is only about money and I'll stop. I'll let you go when it's done." But if you can't say it, he reached for her face, cupping her cheek with a gentleness she hadn't expected. "Then you're mine, not by contract, not by force, but because you want to be." Her breath came in shallow waves, her heart warring with her reason. She thought of her brother, of the deal she had made, of the risk of losing everything. But when she looked into his eyes, so fierce, so vulnerable, so desperate for something he didn't even know how to name, her defenses cracked. "I feel it," she whispered, barely audible. And that was enough. His lips crashed onto hers, no longer restrained, no longer testing. It was hunger and surrender, fire and ruin. For the first time, Elise kissed him back not as a duty, but as a woman giving herself to a man she wanted. The nights that followed blurred into something neither of them could deny. They shared more than passion. They shared secrets. Damien told her his childhood, of a father who had demanded perfection and withheld affection, of a mother too fragile to protect him. He confessed how the empire he had built was less about ambition and more about proving he was worthy. Elise listened, her heart aching for the boy who had grown into a man of steel. In turn, she spoke of her brother, of the nights they had gone hungry together, of the sacrifices she had made to keep him alive. She revealed scars Damien couldn't see, scars of poverty and loss, of endless battles with a world that had always taken more than it gave. In those nights, they found something neither expected, understanding. And with understanding came a bond stronger than contracts or bloodlines. But the world outside their fragile sanctuary did not rest. Veronica grew restless, her suspicions sharpening into hostility. She visited Damien one morning, striding into his office without knocking. "You're a fool," she hissed, slamming a folder onto his desk. Inside were photographs. Elise at the hospital, Elise speaking to doctors, Elise handing over papers with desperation written all over her face. "Do you know who she really is? She's drowning in debt. She's using you to pay for her pathetic brother. She's a parasite, Damien. Nothing more." Damien's jaw clenched as he stared at the photos. He already knew about her brother, of course. He had known since the night she broke down. But seeing it laid out like an accusation stirred something primal in him. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously calm. Veronica's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I said get out, and if you ever speak of her that way again, you'll regret it." His aunt recoiled as if slapped. But she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ah, so the mighty Damien Whitford has fallen. Just remember, nephew, love makes men weak, and weakness will cost you everything." She swept out, leaving the photographs scattered across his desk like shards of broken glass. Damien stared at them for a long time before sweeping them into the fire. But her words clung to him like poison. That night, when he lay beside Elise, he could not quiet the voice in his head. Asterisk, what if she leaves when her brother is healed? What if all this is just a means to an end? Asterisk. As though sensing his turmoil, Elise touched his arm lightly. You're quiet tonight. He looked at her, the flickering firelight painting her features in gold. For a moment, he wanted to ask, wanted to demand the reassurance his heart craved. But the words stuck in his throat, suffocated by pride and fear. Instead, he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, holding her as though holding her could silence his doubts. Days bled into nights, and the deadline drew nearer. Tension thickened in the mansion, the staff whispering more boldly now, Veronica circling like a hawk, Elise's secret fears growing heavier. She had seen the way Damien looked at her lately, not as a transaction, but as something more, and it terrified her, because she knew the truth, that once her brother was safe, once her debt was paid, she might not have the strength to walk away, even if she should. The weight of it all came crashing one evening when Damien walked into her room, his face dark with something she couldn't read. He shut the door behind him and leaned against it, his eyes locked on hers. I need to know, he said, his voice low but unyielding. When this is over, when your brother is healed, when the money is yours, will you stay? Her heart thudded painfully. Her throat tightened with words she couldn't form. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Elise, he pressed, stepping closer, his eyes blazing. Tell me the truth, because I can't keep doing this not knowing if it's real. She swallowed hard, her mind a battlefield of loyalty, fear, and longing. She wanted to tell him yes. She wanted to tell him she would never leave, that what they had was more than a contract. But the voice of reason screamed in her ear, reminding her of promises made, of a world outside these walls, of the danger of loving a man like Damien Whitford. Her silence cut deeper than any answer could. Damien's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. He turned away abruptly, his voice hoarse. I thought so. He left before she could speak, the slam of the door echoing like thunder in her chest. Elise sank onto the bed, her hands covering her face, tears burning her eyes. She wanted to chase after him, to tell him the truth, but fear held her back. Fear that if she gave him her whole heart, she would lose herself completely. Outside, the storm gathered once more, the mansion trembling under its weight. And as the clock ticked relentlessly toward the end of the month, both Damien and Elise stood on the edge of something far greater than inheritance or survival, something neither of them yet had the courage to name. The storm that had been building between them finally broke on the very last night of the 30-day deadline. Damien stood alone in his study, the fire throwing long shadows against the walls, the will lying open before him like a curse. His empire, his fortune, his father's legacy, all of it balanced on a razor's edge. He should have felt rage, fear, or desperation. Instead, all he felt was emptiness. For weeks he had told himself that Elise was just a means to an end, a convenient solution to an impossible problem. But as the minutes slipped toward midnight, all he could see was her face. All he could hear was her voice. He remembered the fire in her eyes when she stood up to Veronica, the tremor in her voice when she confessed about her brother, the softness of her lips when she whispered she felt it too. Money, empire, inheritance, none of it mattered anymore. What terrified him most was the possibility of losing her. When the clock struck 11, the door to the study creaked open, and there she was. Elise stepped in, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides, but her eyes burned with a determination he hadn't seen before. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was louder than words. Finally, she crossed the room, stopping just short of him. Damien, I can't let it end like this. His throat tightened, the walls he had carefully built collapsing under the weight of her presence. Then tell me, he said, his voice rough, almost pleading. Tell me what I need to hear. Will you stay, Elise? Will you stay if all of this falls apart? Her eyes glistened with tears, but there was no hesitation in her voice. Yes, because somewhere between your cold contracts and my desperation, I found something I never thought I'd have. I found you, and I don't care about the money or the inheritance or the name. If tomorrow we wake up with nothing, I will still stay. The words hit him like salvation, shattering the chains that had bound him his entire life. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him, their lips meeting in a kiss that was not about possession or duty, but about surrender, pure and complete. For the first time, Damien Whitford, the man who had built empires and crushed rivals, allowed himself to be vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, he found strength greater than any fortune could offer. But destiny had one final twist waiting for them. As the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, a knock came at the door. It was his lawyer, pale-faced and breathless. "Mr. Whitford," he said urgently, "there has been a development." Damien, still holding Elisa's hand, listened as the lawyer explained. The will, so cruelly worded, had contained a hidden clause, a final test from his father. The requirement of producing an heir within 30 days had not been about biology alone. It was about commitment, about love, about proving Damien could build something beyond power and wealth. If Damien had chosen to buy his way out with surrogates or arranged marriages, he would have failed. But by entering into a bond, by proving he could let someone into his life, the inheritance was secured, not just for an heir, but for the family his father had believed he was capable of building. Damien's breath caught, his eyes flickering to Elise. "So you're saying—" The lawyer nodded, his lips curving into faintest smile. "The estate is safe. The empire is yours. But more importantly, Mr. Whitford, you've passed the test your father left you. You've proven you are not just an heir to wealth, but to his vision." Elisa's tears spilled freely, but this time they were not born of fear or despair. They were born of hope, of relief, of love that had survived every doubt and trial. Damien, overwhelmed, cupped her face and whispered, "Do you see? Even my father knew I needed you. I thought I had everything, but I had nothing until you." And in that moment, it was no longer about contracts or deadlines. It was about a man who had spent his life chasing shadows of power, finally finding light in the one woman who had walked into his life not for what he'd give her, but for what she had the courage to share, her truth, her pain, her heart. The mansion, once cold and suffocating, transformed into a place of warmth. Staff who had once whispered behind Elisa's back now looked at her with respect. Veronica, humiliated and defeated, withdrew into shadows, her power over Damien shattered. And as weeks turned into months, the bond between Damien and Elise deepened, no longer rooted in desperation but in choice. Her brother, thanks to the resources Damien poured into his care, began to recover, his health improving with each passing day. Elise would visit him with Damien by her side, introducing him to the man who had become her reason for survival. And in those moments, Damien understood what it meant to have family. Not the cold, loveless bloodline he had inherited, but the kind of family built on sacrifice, love, and loyalty. The empire thrived, but Damien no longer lived for boardrooms and acquisitions. He lived for laughter shared at breakfast, for quiet walks in the garden with Elise, for nights where love replaced the emptiness that had once haunted him. The man who had once been a prisoner of his father's demands was now free, not because he had fulfilled the will, but because he had found a reason beyond wealth to keep living. And so, the story that began with a billionaire shackled by an impossible ultimatum ended not with the collapse of his empire, but with the birth of something far greater. Damien Whitford, the man who had been given 30 days to secure his future, discovered that the true inheritance was not his fortune. It was love, raw and unbreakable, found in the arms of the one woman who had dared to offer herself not just for money, but for survival, for hope, and ultimately for him. The storm outside faded, replaced by the glow of a new dawn. And in that dawn stood Damien and Elise, no longer bound by contracts or deadlines, but by something eternal. For in choosing each other, they had not only defied fate, they had rewritten it.